The only reason this man took the fight is because it was on 6 days' notice, and he had a built-in excuse.
I want to take his head off even more now that he beat me.
He's a great fighter, but even great's not enough when it comes to me.
Oh, another knockdown! And still, Kamaru Usman!
Taking what from who? This dude is terrifying. Oh! Out cold!
Game bread!
Usman, I can't stand him, man. I can't stand that dude.
It's not done. This time, I'm gonna finish your ass.
I'm coming for that belt.
We'll see what happens when I got a little bit more than 6 days to prepare for your ass.
I'll give you a whole training camp, and this time I will stop him.
We are just one more sleep away from the rematch of Kamaru Usman and Jorge Masvidal for the UFC welterweight crown. And we are just moments away from every fighter on Saturday's UFC 261 card stepping on that scale right there to confirm their entry into the cage there in Jacksonville, where a sold-out arena will be waiting for them. And with that, we say hello and welcome to the UFC 261 official weigh-in show. I'm Michael Eaves. Now, of course, the last time we saw Usman and Mozvidal in the cage was UFC 251 last summer, where the champ put together another dominating performance to get the unanimous decision against Mozvidal, who took the fight on just 6 days' notice, which only added to the intrigue of the rematch that we will get tomorrow night there in Jacksonville. Make sure you go to espnplus.com/PPV right now to order, because this card is filled with stars all at the top. And it is, of course, headlined by that welterweight rematch between Usman and Mozvidal. Just the 8th time in UFC history there will be 3 title fights on a fight card. But it will also feature 2 women's championship fights on the same card for just the 2nd time in UFC history. Zhang Wai Lee defends her strawweight title against former champion Rose Namajunas, while flyweight champion Valentina Shevchenko battles former strawweight champion Jessica Andraj. The only other time there were 2 women's championship fights on a card was UFC 193, when Holly Holm knocked out Ronda Rousey in one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. That's all waiting for us Saturday night, but right now we do have to get to the weigh-ins there in Jacksonville. To begin our coverage, we bring in Ariel Helwani. And Ariel, I know you've been talking about this card all week, Chael Sonnen, we see it here on ESPN Plus, the anticipation for this rematch. But the card itself, as I said, stacked with stars.
Yeah, Michael, and good morning to you. It's great to be back, a part of the weigh-in show. My favorite part of Fight Week. There's nothing more intriguing in sports than the weigh-in show, in my opinion. The most exciting 2 hours in all of sports. And this main card, in my opinion, there's something for everyone. As you said, just the 8th time in UFC history where we have 3 title fights on a UFC card. Think about that. Just the 8th time in UFC history. And as you said, just the 2nd time in UFC history where we have 2 women's title fights on the same card. I was at that card in Melbourne, Florida. And let me tell you, these 2 title fights that we're getting for the women's division, way more competitive than the ones we got back in 2015 when Holly Holm fought Ronda Rousey and when Joanna Jędrzejczyk fought Valerie Letourneau. If I'm being honest, I'm looking forward more to the co-main event involving Zhang Wai Lee and Rose Namajunas than the actual main event involving Kamaru Usman and Jorge Masvidal. That's how competitive, that's how close that co-main event is. So there's something for everyone. You got a former champion.
Let me stop you for a second. Why are you more excited about the co-main event than the main event?
I said this earlier in the week and people thought I was lying.
Okay.
Michael, I want to tell you something right now. No cap, okay? No cap. I've been saying this all week. No cap, Michael.
Okay, for the kids, no cap.
Yes, for the kids. When Rose is humming, when Rose is on, when Rose is doing her thing on her feet, there is no fighter that I enjoy watching more than Rose Namajunas. And the last 2 times we saw her, including the time she lost to Jessica Andrade, that first round, you want to show someone the beauty of MMA, you want to show someone the beauty involved in striking, you show them that first round against Jessica Andrade, you show them her last fight against Jessica Andrade. And then you have the buzzsaw that is Zhang Wai Lee, who's kind of like, if you want to equate it to old school boxing, like a Mexican-style boxer who sits in the pocket, like clenches down on her gum shield and just goes for it. That clash right there to me is fascinating. Also, from an odds standpoint, it's the closest one as well. So clearly Vegas agrees with me that it's going to be a tight one.
Yeah, and I understand the intrigue, obviously, but we all love a rematch too, though, Ariel. And when it comes to combat sports, having the intrigue from what happened the last time with Kamaru Usman and Mozvidal, and the little trash talk we've had, even as soon as the fight was over, Usman was trash talking Mozvidal, saying he had an excuse. The only reason he took the fight was because he had an excuse. Now he's got a full training camp to see exactly what will happen when both fighters come in fully prepared.
Please, 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 don't get me wrong. I love this main event. I'm just telling you that there's a part of me that's more excited for the co-main event because perhaps we haven't seen that fight before. And look, there are some people out there, some smart people who say 6-week camp, 8-week camp, 12-week camp. Kamaru Usman just has a skill set that is not really good for a Jorge Masvidal, right? Kamaru Usman is such a good fighter that he is going to negate whatever Masvidal does. And I'm not saying I'm not excited. And speaking of which, the star of the show is right here. So let me take it from here for a few minutes, Michael, if I can. There he is, Street Jesus, Cuban Jesus, #1 on the scale, Jorge Masvidal. See how he looks? Getting my golf voice now for you, Michael.
170 pounds, the official weight for Jorge Gamebred Masvidal.
No drama this time. Obviously, he had a lot more time to prepare, a lot more time to cut weight. Last time, all he had was 7 days. There you see it. Jorge Masvidal, 18 years in the game, in his 50th pro fight, in his 20th UFC fight, making weight. What a story this would be. 18 years. He would be #2 on the list of guys who needed more than 20 fights to get a UFC title. Michael Bisping has the record. 26 fights it took Michael Bisping to win a UFC
belt. All right, next fighter to the scale is the undisputed UFC Women's Strawweight Champion, defending her title for a second time here tomorrow night, Zhang Wai Lee.
You got to love the fact that you have the big stars coming out first, sending a message to the younger stars, to the bottom of the deck, so to speak. This is how you act as a professional. You show up, you make weight, you go, you rehydrate, and of course we have these ceremonial weigh-ins later today in Jacksonville, Duval County, as the fans of the Jaguars like to say. There's the pride of China, Zhang Wai Lee. Last time we saw her, March of 2020. She skipped over the whole empty arena era. Stepping on the scales, Zhang Wai Lee, strawweight champion. Phenomenal shape as always.
114.5 pounds, the official weight for the champion, Zhang Wai Lee.
That slight pause there from John Anik got me a little nervous. 114.5 for Zhang Wai Lee. That means she is good to go. She's in the co-main event. You know, historically, the heavier weight gets the top billing over the lighter weight, but in this case, again, going back to what I said, this is a big-time fight. Zhang Wai Lee, Rose Namajunas is the co-main. Valentina Shevchenko for the 125-pound title against Jessica Andraj is the tri-main.
All right, next fighter to the scale is the #1 ranked women's flyweight contender and former UFC strawweight champion, Jessica Andraj.
You got to love this. It was just 2 years ago that Zhang Wai Lee knocked out Jessica Andraj in China to win the strawweight title. Now here's Jessica Andraj, who recently moved up to 125, going for that title, trying to become a champion in 2 different weight classes. She looked very good in her flyweight debut back in October, defeating Caitlin Chukagian in the first round. Beautiful hook to the body. A lot of people think she will be Shevchenko's toughest test at 125 pounds. Minus 450 is Shevchenko right now.
124.5, the official weight for Jessica Andraj.
So she is good to go. 124.5 for Jessica Andraj. It started as a -4.
All right, next fighter to the scale, another former UFC strawweight champion and now the #1 contender set to challenge for the title again, Thug Rose Namajunas.
I mean, how about this? All the biggest stars showing up first. Now we get Thug Rose Namajunas, originally from Wisconsin, now training out of Colorado. Phenomenal win over Jessica Andrade. You see her fiance, Pat Barry, the legend, HD Barry, by her side. Coming off of nose surgery. Always stoic. No nonsense. Thug Rose Namajunas, 9-4 as a pro.
114.5, the official weight for Rose Namajunas.
That's 114.5 for Thug Rose, trying to become the first female in UFC history to win the same
next fighter
title.
to the scale is
two
the
separate
undisputed
occasions.
UFC Women's Flyweight Champion, set to make a 5th defense of her title, Valentina "Bullet" Shevchenko.
I mean, this might be a first. Are we going to get all 6 title competitors in the first 5 minutes? 5 down, 1 to go. Here's the Bullet, Valentina Shevchenko. Regardless of gender, one of the best fighters in the world right now. She has looked virtually unstoppable since moving down to 125, coming off that win over Jennifer Maia, undefeated as a flyweight. Has won 6 in a row, 5 of those in title fights. Now up against the former champion at 115, Jessica Andraj. She's the pride of Kyrgyzstan.
The official weight, 124.5 pounds for Valentina Shevchenko.
So there you have it, 124.5 for Shevchenko's. Usman next. Do we have a Kamaru Usman? Does he complete the trifecta here? Shevchenko, Andraj, good to go.
All right, next fighter to the scale, taking part in a prelim that you can see live on ESPN in the UFC's middleweight division, Karl Roberson.
Okay, not quite Kamaru Usman, but 5 of the 6 fighters competing in the 3 title fights, they're all good to go. We just saw Jorge Masvidal first, Zhang Wai Lee, Rose Namajunas, Valentina Shevchenko, Jessica Andraj. Will move down the card now and say hello to Karl Roberson, who goes up against Brendan Allen on the prelims. 9-3, coming off a loss to Marvin Vettori back in June of 2020. Had a couple fights canceled since then. He's had some bad luck.
185 pounds, the official weight for Karl Roberson.
There he is, Karl Roberson, 185. He is good to go in his fight against Brendan Allen. Baby K, they like to call him. Fighting out of Neptune, New Jersey. Turned 30 back
next
in
fighter
October.
to the scale in the UFC men's flyweight division, Jeff Molina.
The 8-2 Jeff Molina about to step on the scale. El Jefe. Fighting out of Glory, MMA and Fitness, of course. James Krause, one of the top coaches in the sport. Coaching out of there, fighting out of there as well in Missouri. Molina, a product of the Contender Series program. Got his contract back in August of last year. This is his official UFC debut. Has fought in LFA, has fought in Victory FC, but getting an opportunity to fight in the UFC for the very first time.
126 pounds, the official weight for Jeff Molina.
Jeff Molina hits his mark, 126. You get a 1 pound allowance when you're fighting in a non-title fight. So this is a flyweight fight. You get to weigh in as high as 126. He has won his last 7 fights in a row, looking to win his first in the UFC. And I do believe, hard to tell with the mask, but I do believe
All right, next athlete to the scale in the UFC's lightweight division, set to make his debut tomorrow night, Rong Zhu.
And here we have Rong Zhu, 17-3. Just 21 years old, has won his last 10 in a row, fighting out of Enbo Fight Club in China. Getting to fight on the same card as his fellow countrymate, Zhang Wai Lee, the champion.
The official weight, 156 pounds for Rong Zhu.
All right, so Rong Zhu is good to go for his UFC debut. 156 pounds.
All right, next fighter to the scale happens to be
Chinese
his opponent in the UFC's lightweight division, Kazula Vargas.
Cazulo Rodrigo Vargas. You always love when the opponents weigh in back to back. 14-year age gap between these two fighters. Vargas looking to snap a 2-fight losing streak. Has yet to win in the UFC, 0-2 inside the octagon, so a potential must-win situation for him. Losses to Alex De Silva back in August of 2019 and lost to Brock Weaver. That one was a little controversial. It was an illegal knee, but a loss nonetheless. It was in February of 2020. Here is Kazula Vargas fighting out of Mexico, Mexico City.
155, the official weight for Kazula Vargas.
So the lightweight Vargas makes weight, fighting out of Mexican Pride Gym. 11-4 as a pro, but looking to snap a 2-fight.
All right, next fighter to the scale is the man around whom this fight card was built, the undisputed UFC welterweight champion, the Nigerian Nightmare, Kamaru Usman.
Is Anna going to get that trademark? I feel like he should get that trademark. The man around whom this fight card was built. Kamaru Usman. Here he is, 18-1, 13-0 in the UFC. The Nigerian Nightmare. Just saw him in February. Deserves a lot of credit, returning 2.5 months later. Great win over Gilbert Burns.
169 1/2 pounds, the official weight for the champion, Kamaru Usman.
Interesting that the majority of the competitors in the title fights came in a ½ pound under. Don't recall that happening so often, but the good news is Kamaru Usman is good to go. 169.5 for Mr. Usman. Mozvidal, the only one who came in exactly on the dot. 170 for Mozvidal. Zhang Wai Lee, 114.
All right, next fighter to the scale, part of the featured prelim in the welterweight division, live on ESPN, Alex Cowboy Oliveira.
Nama Yunus, 114.5. Andraj, 124.5. Shevchenko, 124.5. And then Usman, 169.5. We say hello now to the Brazilian cowboy, Alex Oliveira, fighting in the prelims against Randy Brown. 22-9-1. Bit of a different haircut these days for Mr. Oliveira. I like it. Letting it grow.
171 pounds for Alex Cowboy Oliveira.
Oliveira coming off a loss in October, looking to get back on track. This fight was supposed to happen in February, got canceled due to a Randy Brown injury, but now they are back.
Next fighter to the scale in the UFC strawweight division, Ariani Carnelosi.
So we'll say hello to one of the competitors competing in the curtain jerker on Saturday, Ariani Carnelosi of Brazil, 12-2, looking to win her first UFC fight. She hasn't fought in quite some time. September of 2019 was her last fight, a loss to Angela Hill in that bout. She was supposed to fight Mackenzie Dern back in April of 2020. That fight got canceled, of course, due to the pandemic. And now here she is fighting Liang Na in phenomenal shape. Training out of São Paulo, Brazil, inside Muay Thai.
115 on the nose for Ariani Carnelosi.
Interestingly enough, she lost her her MMA debut back in 2014 to Amanda Ribas. She then went on a 12-fight winning streak and then lost to Angela Hill in her UFC debut. You see right there, she is good to go. 115.
All right, next fighter to the scale in the UFC's featherweight division out of Philadelphia, PA, Pat Sabatini.
Say hello now to the 13-3 Pat Sabatini, fighting in his UFC debut as well. He was supposed to fight in February, but his opponent, Rafael Alves, missed weight. He is the former Cage Fury FC featherweight champion, won that title back in December. It was a vacant title fight. Now here he is fighting against the Canadian Tristan Connolly. 13 fights on this card.
146, the official weight for Pat Sabatini.
146 for Mr. Sabatini, fighting out of Pennsylvania, 30 years young, looking to pick up his very first win inside the octagon against the always game Tristan Connolly.
All right, next fighter to the scale, charged with kicking off the pay-per-view main card in the UFC's light heavyweight division, 13th ranked Jimmy Croot.
Oh, this is going to be a fun one. Jimmy Croot versus Anthony Smith. The young guard versus the old guard, 25 years young. Last year, ESPN.com named Jimmy Croot the best fighter in MMA under 25. He is now 25, so he can't make that list anymore, but still very much a rising star in the sport on a 2-fight winning streak. Supposed to fight Johnny Walker last month. That fight got canceled. They put together this fight against Anthony Smith.
205.5, the official weight for Jimmy Croot.
That is 205.5 for the Brute, Jimmy Croot, fighting out of Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, going up against the former light heavyweight contender, Anthony Lionheart
All right,
Smith.
next fighter to the scale in the UFC's flyweight division, Orichi Lang.
Hello now to Orichi Lang. As John Anik said, fighting in the flyweight division. Going up against Jeff Molina. They call him the Mongolian Murderer.
126, the official weight for the newcomer, Orichi Lang.
He has won 6 fights in a row. This is his UFC debut, and one of several fighters fighting out of Asia on this card, fighting out of Inner Mongolia,
next
China.
To the scale in the UFC's welterweight division, the body snatcher, Dwight Grant.
We'll say hello now to Dwight Grant, fighting also on the prelims. 10-3 as a pro, one of the best nicknames in MMA. Coming off that loss to Daniel Rodriguez back in August. Going up against Stefan Sekulich.
170 pounds, the official weight for Dwight Grant.
Dwight Grant, fighting out of AKA.
All right, next fighter to the
San Jose,
scale. You can see him
California.
compete live on ESPN in a middleweight prelim. He is Brendan All-In Allen.
Here is Brendan Allen going up against Carl Roberson. All-In Allen, 25 years young. Training, of course, out of Rufus Sport, the pride of Slidell, Louisiana. Coming off that loss to
186,
Sean
the official
Strickland.
weight for Brendan Allen.
186 for Brendan Allen, looking to get back on track.
All right, next fighter to the scale. You can also see him compete live on ESPN as he comes back for the first time in a long time in the UFC's featherweight division, Tristan Boondock Connolly.
And what a story this is. Tristan Connolly, you'll recall, took that fight on short notice against Michel Pereira in September of 2019. He was a pretty big underdog, beat Pereira in Vancouver, hasn't fought since. COVID, car accident, neck surgery has delayed his return, so almost
146 pounds, the official weight for Tristan Connolly.
great to see Tristan Connolly, a.k.a. Boondock, in good spirits and in good shape. Almost a year and a half later, here he is. The man who pulled off the biggest upset of 2019 has had to overcome a lot just to get back to the UFC and have his sophomore effort. He is good to go for his fight against Pat Sabatini.
All right, moving back to the UFC women's strawweight division now as we welcome Liang Na.
Say hello now to Liang Na, fighting in the curtain jerker. 15-4 as a pro. She has won her last 4 fights in a row. She was nicknamed Dragon Lady. She recently changed her nickname to Dragon Girl. Interestingly enough. To some. She's going up against Ariani Carnelosi. That's
116.5 for now for Liang Na.
For Liang Na,
Half
which
pound over
means
the
she is.
strawweight limit.
Thank you, John. Yes, a half pound over. So we might have an appearance here by the dreaded hoop, and there it is, right on cue. I haven't seen the hoop in quite some time, but there it is. And this has evolved over the years. There was once a time where you'd have to hold up a bunch of towels and whatnot, all kinds of issues, but this has been perfected into a seamless system. Break out the hoop, step back on the scale, good to go. Hands up. See how much that new Venom gear weighs. It's a fascinating thing, these official weigh-ins. Where else do you get this? Where else do you get this drama, this theater, this excitement?
116, the official weight for
And
Liang
how about
Na.
that? I mean, you talk about, the 18th at Augusta. Give me this, 116 for Liang Na. That's coming in the clutch. UFC debut. You don't want to miss weight. Fighting out of China as well. Dragon Girl, Liang Na. Coming in the clutch. I said she's won 4 in a row. Need to win her UFC debut tomorrow night against Ariani Carnelosi. So that's 116.
All right, next fighter to the scale, the other half of the
Liang Na.
featured welterweight prelim live on ESPN, Randy Rudeboy Brown.
Yes, here he is, Randy Brown, repping Jamaica, repping Queens, 30 years young. Coming off that loss to Vicente Luque, TKO loss in the second round back in August of last year, going up against Alex Cowboy Oliveira tomorrow in the featured ESPN prelim bout. Randy Brown.
$171, the official weight for Randy Brown.
So Randy Brown is good to go. And a nice 2-fight winning streak against Varley Alves and Brian Barberina snapped by Luque. Looking to get back on track against the always game Cowboy Oliveira. 20 fighters down, just 6 to go. How about that? In the first 23 minutes, we have seen 20 fighters step on the scale, most notably the 6 fighters competing in the 3 title fights tomorrow night. Valentina Shevchenko, 124.5. Jessica Andraj, 124.5. Zhang Wai Lee, 114.5. Rose Namajunas, 114.5. Jorge Masvidal, 170. Kamaru Usman, 169.5. All of them good to go. We had we don't have Anthony Smith yet. Jimmy Croot weighed in, still to come. Chris Weidman, Uriah Hall, Anthony Smith on the main card, and a whole bunch of other fighters. All right, let's say hello
All right,
now.
next fighter to the scale, set to compete live on UFC Fight Pass in the bantamweight division.
John Anik has other plans. All right, let's go back. We'll get to Brett. You know Brett, he was right there. But let's say hello to the 21st fighter to step on the scale, Dana Batgeril. They call him Storm, training out of Jackson Wink in Albuquerque, born in Mongolia. I like that they put a lot of fighters from the same region on this card. Very smart in terms of the international expansion of the sport. He goes up against Kevin Natividad.
.136, the official weight for Storm Dana Batgedi.
So Storm is good to go. He is coming off a win over Guido Canetti back in March of last year. So he has not fought in the pandemic. That was the last card pre-pandemic, if you will, here in the United States. Same card that Zhang Wai Lee fought Ioanni Jacek on. They were supposed to fight, he was supposed to fight in October against Kyler Phillips, but unfortunately he had to withdraw. So we've got 5 fighters left. The 2 most notable ones, Chris Weidman, I'll say 3, Chris Weidman, Uriah Hall, and Anthony Smith. Those are the ones still to come. 21 good to go, 5 left. We shall now, no, my math is bad. 21, is that 5? Yeah, 26. 13 times 2 is 26. I suck at this. Brett, good to see you. Good morning to you. Any, I'll always ask this question right off the top. Any big takeaways as far as the first 26 minutes of these weigh-ins are concerned?
I think it's our guy, John Anik, just being completely in his element with all of these international names, man. I think he stayed up late preparing for this one, and he is knocking out of the park. It's almost like he's showing off with some of these ones, but that's no surprise from John. And it's no surprise that I thought all title contenders, champions, they all looked great. Obviously, Jorge smiling big, much easier weight cut for him. That's been the story this entire week. And yeah, Kamaru, making these cuts. We know that this guy cuts a lot of weight, and if there's anything that might be a little concerning about him wanting to be so active, this guy wants to be incredibly active. We've seen that. He fought in February. You mentioned that when he stepped on the scale. Now fighting, obviously, tomorrow. Told me if he wins this fight, he wants to turn around and fight again. I was like, yeah, probably at the end of the year. He's like, maybe not. Maybe sooner. So Kamaru wants to stay active. He wants to potentially fight 2 more times, even after this year, which would be pretty remarkable. And the only thing that gives you pause about that is that this guy has to cut weight then all those times. But hey, he looks very comfortable all week, and he looked comfortable today.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's music to the brass's ears when you have a champion who wants to be that active. Michael, I know you were just in Augusta for the Masters, but that doesn't hold a candle to what we just witnessed. 27 minutes in, 21 fighters, the 6 fighters competing in title fights, all weighing in as pros. I mean, I need to take a break. I need to drink some coffee because that was just too much excitement for a Friday morning for me.
Yeah, it was pretty efficient to say the least. I wish some of the guys in the PJ Tour played golf a little faster, but that's a story for a different show. Let's continue with our coverage of UFC 261 because if you remember, last July, Kamaru Usman was seeking a new opponent after Gilbert Burns had to drop out of that scheduled title fight. So in steps Jorge Gamebred Masvidal on just 6 days' notice, as we've mentioned, in an attempt to capture gold for the first time in his career. Here's a look back at that last-minute meeting and how it led to their rematch here at UFC 261.
What an unbelievable weekend in just 6 days' time. Jorge Masvidal, he's about to fight for his very first UFC title.
To have the biggest fight of his life, 22 pounds over when he wasn't even in training camp.
Masvidal breathing heavy, hard to blame him. Elbow from Usman. Will there be a baptism?
There's still fight left in this, dog.
Oh, could you imagine?
Kamaru Usman at his suffocating best.
We're gonna run it back.
UFC 258, Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns.
Kamaru Usman is the real deal. Oh, huge right. That's it. And that will do it. The best welterweight in the world.
And there is a new record holder for the longest winning streak in UFC welterweight history, Kamaru Usman.
This is my cage. When you get in here, it's different ball game. I'm a whole nother savage. We got this little street thug. The only reason this man took the fight is because it was on 6 days' notice and he had a built-in excuse and he's still running his mouth. Guess what? It's not done.
Now back to business. I need that belt wrapped around my waist.
Oh, he took the fight on 6 days' notice, but so did I.
I'll give you a whole training camp because this time I'm going to finish your ass.
There's no way in hell somebody that takes a fight with me on 6 day notice, I'm going to let him walk out of there conscious.
Let's go, man. Come on.
Again, so if you go back to that fight, if you remember, it was a unanimous decision for Usman on all the judges' cards. But here's the deal. The champ had some success standing and trading blows with the challenger. Usman able to land 94 significant strikes compared to Mozvidal's 66. As we bring Ariel back into the conversation, it's interesting. We keep talking about Mozvidal taking this fight on short notice, but Usman says, so did I. He spent a whole training camp preparing for Gilbert Burns, but all of a sudden, a week out, he takes on Mozvidal, and he took a very smart approach, obviously, to an opponent he wasn't fully prepared for, and we saw a dominating performance from the champ in that one. So, Ariel, as I start with you, even with the full training camp, why would anyone think that Usman wouldn't have a similar performance against Mozvidal?
Well, as you know, Michael, styles make fights in MMA, and there are just some guys who match up better against others in a sport. You can go 10-0 against one guy and then 0-10 against another guy. I think a lot of people think that Kamaru Usman's skill set, that his strength will negate whatever strengths that Jorge Masvidal has, and that's in particular his wrestling, his clinch work. He wants to put this fight up against the cage. He wants to make it a dirty fight. He wants to stomp the feet. He wants to frustrate Jorge Masvidal. But I'll say this, number one, Usman's striking has improved. I think going to Colorado and training with Trevor Whitman has been a phenomenal decision on his part, and we saw that improvement against Gilbert Burns. And I'll also say this, Jorge Masvidal's wrestling is better than the wrestling that we saw back in July. And so I think that the fight will be closer than the one that we saw back in July. I think it will go the distance, but I don't expect a 50-45 for Usman. Certainly don't expect a 50-45 for Masvidal. 49-46, 48-47, something like that. This fight is going to be a lot more competitive than the first fight because of the weight cut, because of the time that they've had to train, because of the time they had to prepare, and because of the improvements that both men have made since that fight. Usman has improved a lot since July, believe it or not, and I'm excited to see him hang in there on the feet in the middle of the cage with Jorge Masvidal.
Brett, what are your takes on this bout, especially since it is a rematch, but also because Masvidal had so much more time to train for this matchup?
Yeah, well, the weird thing about this rematch is that it could look exactly like the first one. It could, or it could look completely different. And usually we don't say that. We say that, we kind of got a real strong look at a style matchup, and we have a certain idea of if it could go a very, very similar way. What's strange to me is that you have this narrative of Jorge coming in with 6 days notice, which is a real thing. To me, it is a very, very real thing. To me, that first fight looked a little bit, strange from the standpoint of Jorge was just kind of handcuffed from the sense of he was not in great shape. He did cut a whole lot of weight. Was he rolling off the couch? No, he was in the gym a little bit. So that narrative is a little bit over-exaggerated that he wasn't in the gym. But when you're fighting a guy like Kamaru, when you're fighting the guy who has a stylistic advantage against you, to go in when you're not at your best, to go in when you don't have your cardio ramped up is a difficult thing. So I think that he was managing his energy. He was waiting for the right opportunity. He was exploding when he could. And then when he wasn't exploding, he was just sort of conserving his energy. And Kamaru didn't want to take chances. So you had sort of this stalemate where Kamaru was holding him there. And he's like, well, I'm winning this fight, so I'm not going to take a risk. And you had Jorge saying, I need to manage my energy level. So I expect the fight to look different from that sense. But even with these two at their complete best, the stylistic matchup, like Ariel mentioned, could favor Kamaru so much that we see basically the same fight, even though these two are kind of completely different than they were back in July.
Yeah. The thing that stood out to me in that first bout, Masvidal didn't have that energy we're so accustomed to seeing. And as Brett said, it had a lot to do clearly with that weight cut in a very short period of time. But Usman was dominating nonetheless in all the skills that he brings to the cage. And that's why, for a lot of standpoint, you could see it going the same way even if Masvidal has more time to prepare because Usman is so good. That's not a knock on Masvidal. We just have to give credit where credit is due as it relates to Usman. Brett, let me ask you this question. Let's go big picture here a little bit for Usman. 13-0 since he came to the UFC. Of course, trying to be the greatest ever at 170 pounds. GSP has that crown for now, but also trying to chase down Anderson Silva's record of starting 16-0. in his UFC career. How much is legacy leaning on this fight for Usman?
When you get up into this kind of rarefied air, the legacy is always on the line, right? I mean, you have to be perfect. If you're trying to chase down guys like Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, those top names, those guys who did it year after year after year, you can't falter once. So legacy is always on the line now every single time Kamaru Usman fights. But even to add to that, I think his legacy is going to rise significantly over this next chapter of his career because people are really paying attention to this guy now. You know, for a long time, you know, Kamaru Usman was flying under the radar. It took him a long time to get even a title shot. You know, George St. Pierre got a UFC title fight, I think, in his third UFC appearance. It took Kamaru Usman nearly 10 fights to step in there and win a UFC belt. So he was flying under the radar. Now he is not, and he's got some big fights in front of him. This is a big fight. A rematch with Colby Covington is a big fight. You know, if Leon Edwards gets the job done against Nate Diaz and his stock goes up and you're talking about him having a long win streak, those are big fights for Kamaru Usman. And so now you're not only padding all those numbers that we're talking about, you're chasing down George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva, but you're doing so in a way that a lot of people are watching and talking about you. So his legacy could go through the roof. His stock could go through the roof over the next year, especially because, as I mentioned earlier, this guy wants to be active. He wants to be fighting every few months, and fans love that.
Yeah, you're active every few months. You're getting more and more checks. Ariel, do you think from Usman's standpoint, he's like, yeah, I need a little more, I don't know, hype, a little more attention so I can get these bigger checks because my skill set says I'm one of the biggest stars in the sport right now?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, his resume speaks for itself, and I think there is a part of Kamaru Usman, whether he wants to admit it or not, who says, like, why don't I get the attention that some of these other guys get? Why don't I get the attention that a Izzy gets, that a Conor gets, that a Mozvidal gets, that a Francis Ngannou has been getting as of late? And so I think one way to do that is to have performances like he did back in February against Gilbert Burns. What a win that was, what a performance it was, what a finish it was. And another way to do that is to be active, because the more that you are active, the more you're seen and talked about by the community, the more they rally around you. And I think that if he does come back, as Brett mentioned, you know, in, I don't know, 3-4 months and fights a guy, a quote unquote heel like a Colby Covington, I think the fans will love him even more. This is a tough spot for him because Mozvidal is so beloved and has been around the sport for so long, and there's, I think, a sector of the audience that wants to see him finally win a title after 18 years in the game. But there has been a shift, in my opinion, in Kamaru Usman. And I think it really started leading up to the Gilbert fight, the way he handled that, and then post-Gilbert fight, the way he handled that as well. It was very emotional, but I think Usman handled it with all class. So I feel like there's a shift. You know, ESPN getting behind him, the cover story, all that stuff. People are starting to learn more about his backstory, about what he's been through. Brett wrote a great feature on him. I mean, I just think there's a lot coming together for this guy. Sometimes it happens in a fight like a Conor. Sometimes it takes 13 fights. For Usman, he's taking the long route. But make no mistake about it, he is one of the faces of the UFC now, and it's well-deserved.
Our next fighter to the scale in the UFC's welterweight division, he is Stefan Sekulich.
All right. Yep, and on cue, we have Stefan Sekulich. Now, while we were speaking about the main event, we did have another fighter step on the scale. That was Natividad. So we are now down to 4. Yes, 4. Kevin Natividad, 3. Okay. Well, 3. I'm including this one, Corporate Jake. Corporate Jake telling me, I mean, the guy didn't weigh in yet, so you have to wait for him to actually make weight on the scale. Here is
171,
Sekulich.
the official weight for Stefan Sekulich.
Okay, now it's 3. Stefan Sekulich is good to go. Kevin Natividad made weight as well. And interestingly enough, we now have 3 pretty big names to go. This is very rare. We have Chris Weidman, Uriah Hall, his opponent, so that's really rare and interesting. And, of course, Anthony Smith. Again, I mean, you could break out the 1986 Masters, Michael, but to me, this is, I mean, what does Greg Norman have on this? Nothing. That's what he has, nothing.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't think that Jack Nicklaus was going to win that in 1986. It was about the stars, but it was a story nonetheless, so we will see what will happen tomorrow night there in Jacksonville. More from Ariel and Brett in a moment, but let's take a little more focus on Jorge Masvidal here for a second, because it's been a full 9 months since he was last in the octagon. That fight, of course, we just mentioned when he lost to Kamaru Usman, seeking championship goal for the first time in his career. But again, this is a full training camp now, 6 weeks before his rematch with Usman, and that's why Masvidal believes that the outcome will be much different. And he shared some of that with Ariel not long ago.
Masvidal grinning ear to ear, man. Masvidal super aggressive with everything he has thrown early on.
Masvidal looks very sharp here tonight.
When's the last time you watched that fight, the first fight against Usman?
Like a week ago.
Okay. And when you watch it, what do you see?
I see somebody that's not mean versus somebody that is very mean-spirited. I see somebody that is content to just hold and rub my feet instead of somebody that, man, I want to hurt you, man. I want to give every single fan in there whether they love me or they hate me, I want to give them money's worth. Man, with 6-day notice and 20 pounds of cut, I did some damage to him, and he literally couldn't do anything to me because I'm so much more man than him. So I'm thinking, 30 days, that's like ×5. Yeah, I'm gonna murder this guy.
How bad was that weight cut? I saw the picture, I saw you draped in the, the towels on the floor there, but be honest, how difficult was it to actually get to 170?
The last 3 pounds took longer than the first 17, if that kind of gives you like a better understanding of how tough it was. Weight cut was tough, and as you get older, it just gets rougher. When I used to fight at 55, I used to cut between like 17 and 18 pounds, but I was in my 20s and it would hurt, but I could do it, I could recuperate. As I stand right now, I'm like, I just finished training right now, I'm like 9 pounds to go, so let's rock and roll.
So then we get to mid-February and Usman fights Burns.
And that will do it! And still, the best welterweight in the world, Kamaru Usman.
What are you thinking when he's doing the post-fight interview with Joe Rogan? The champion doesn't call out someone, especially someone that he beat, but yet he made it pretty clear that he wanted to fight you next.
We got this little street thug calling himself Jesus. He thinking he's Jesus. And, Joe, we tried to make that fight several times. They tried to make that fight, but he kept backing out. The only reason this man took the fight is because it was on 6 days' notice, and he had a built-in excuse, and he's still running his mouth.
All I could think is like, all right, cool, we're gonna fight, blah, blah, blah. But then he said some stupid things. He said that I called myself Jesus. I've never said I'm Jesus. I'll never claim to be Jesus. And the street Jesus thing, I get it. I have long hair, maybe a similar complexion of Jesus, and the internet's undefeated and people are throwing out the street Jesus thing. That's not Jesus, that's street Jesus. He was like, oh, okay, I got it. You trying to sell pay-per-views? Okay, I'm just trying to murder you, so whatever. I'm gonna go get this title. I'm gonna keep generating more views, more knockouts, more violence, and then I'm gonna take it out on Kobe at some point, as long as he could win. If he could win, he's dead.
What happened there? Why didn't that come to fruition?
The Kobe deal was that we already knew we had the Usman fight. So why am I gonna fight the second place guy that got his jaw broken, left running out of the ring, didn't talk for months on Twitter because he got his jaw broken? Why don't I go fight the guy that broke his jaw? Because I've already been beating the crap out of Kobe for God knows how long. I'm gonna beat the crap out of him too before my career's done.
What do you think it will feel like when you get the belt on April 24th, and how will you celebrate? Have you thought about this?
I've only dreamt about this, 365 days times 18 years, 17 years, that actually longer. When I was like 12, 13 years old is when I was like, I'm gonna be the world's greatest in this thing. I'm gonna be the world's best. It's all I'm gonna do, and that's it, So I've dreamt of this moment a lot. I don't know exactly how I'm gonna celebrate or what I'm gonna do. I know I'm gonna be eating a lot of food at some point.
Now, if Mozvidal is going to pull the upset and knock off Usman, you would think it would come by way of knockout, because that's what Gamebred does. Since moving up to 170 pounds in 2015, Mozvidal's knocked out 6 opponents, including his last 5 wins. And those 6 knockouts are third most since 2015. Ariel and Brett, back into the conversation. Ariel, I'll start with you. From that conversation you had with Mozvidal then, what was the biggest thing that stood out to you coming off the loss to Usman and now setting it up here for the rematch?
Well, obviously the big one, the weigh-in situation. I mean, we just saw it come to fruition there. That is the main reason why they're able to run this one back so soon, right? I mean, historically, the challenger loses 50-45 in a dominant fight like that. Like you don't get an immediate rematch. Remember, Jorge Masvidal hasn't fought since that fight. Kamaru Usman has fought. He fought 2.5 months ago. And so historically, you'll never see a situation like this. But the circumstances, 7 days notice, the massive weight cut, all that leads to people saying, all right, he deserves it. He's done enough in this sport. Let's see him with a full training camp. And so he talked a good game. He said he'd be in shape. He said that the weight cut wouldn't be as bad this time around. And we saw it come to fruition just about 45 minutes ago when he stepped on the scale at 170 pounds. The other big thing for me is just how much this title means to him. Some fighters will say, the belt, all that stuff, it doesn't mean that much to me. No, Jorge Masvidal has said it, and he said it again in this interview, in this conversation. The belt means the world to him. He wants to bring that title back to his family. His family has been through so much. His father, escaping Cuba, his family, everything that they had to build for themselves in Florida, him sleeping in a car in the midst of his career not that long ago with a window that couldn't roll up and it's pouring rain in Miami, Florida, and all he has is a dog and a car to his name. This man has been through a lot. He started on the streets 18 years later. This doesn't happen in the fight game, Michael. This doesn't happen where a guy 18 years in the game finally becomes a superstar. And he wants that belt as validation. He wants that belt as a symbol that he made it, that he was someone in this sport. And so he's not beating around the bush. He is saying, this belt means everything. I want this belt, and this is my chance to get it.
Brett, for someone who's never won a championship, Mozvidal is clearly one of the more popular fighters that the UFC has ever produced, especially considering he has the fastest knockout in UFC history with that knee to Ben Askren's forehead. But to Ariel's point, Brett, what would it do for Mozvidal to not only win the championship belt, but also knock out or beat Usman, however he beats him, to beat Usman, who's won 13 in a row since he came to the UFC?
I think it would obviously rise his star power even higher than it is, which is, I wouldn't say tough to do because there's always, more levels to reach in this sport as far as superstardom goes, but he's already, in that top stratosphere of names in the UFC. But I think it's more to what Ariel said. I mean, he's turned into the superstar. He's finally cashed in. For a long time, even up until this last fight against Usman, he said he wasn't getting what he deserved. He paid his dues in this sport for a very long time. He had always said this guy's inner confidence is pretty remarkable. When you ask him, Michael, when you were in those situations that Ariel just described, and you were looking in your fridge and there wasn't anything in there, and you were living in your car, did you believe that this was ever going to happen? And you expect him to say, man, I didn't know. Like, how can you go from that situation and think that you're going to have millions in the bank? He always says, yes, I knew where the sport was going, and I knew what I was going to do in it. And to me, that's super interesting in this title fight as well, because when he lost to Kamaru Usman in July, you saw videos of it. He looked at Dana White and said, give me a full camp and I'll beat that guy. I don't think in many circumstances where we're looking at a fight like this, where two guys are fighting, less than a year after one of them lost every single round to the other guy, that the challenger would still come in with complete confidence. But Jorge Masvidal is coming in with complete confidence that he can beat Kamaru Usman. And to answer your question, Michael, what it will do is it'll raise his stock even more, but it'll also just validate everything that he has done over the course of his career. And it looks like I didn't hear John, but we have another fighter here, and here it is, Chris Weidman.
Yes, Carolina Chris. Now fighting out of South Carolina, the pride of Baldwin, New York. Recently moved his family to South Carolina.
186 pounds, the official weight for the former champ, Chris Weidman.
186 for Chris Weidman, a rematch of a fight. Talk about rematches. This one first happened 10.5 years ago in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Ring of Combat middleweight championship.
All right, next fighter to the scale is on a serious role in the UFC's middleweight division, Uriah Primetime Hall.
And how about that? Uriah Hall. Man, I was just talking about. Uriah Hall at the time was 4-0, Weidman 2-0. They met in a huge fight, September of 2010. Weidman beat him to win the ROC, the Ring of Combat middleweight title. They meet again 10.5 years later. There's a bit of bad blood here between these two guys. Love this matchmaking. Can't wait for this fight. Hall has won 3 in a row, fighting out of Fortis MMA now.
185 pounds, the official weight for Uriah Hall.
Chris Weidman coming off a win over Omari Akhmedov. And that means we only have one fighter left. That is Anthony Smith. Historically, doesn't have any issues making 205. A former middleweight who now fights at 205 going up against Jimmy Croot. So we are 25 down, 1 to go. That's Anthony Smith. Let's stick with the Chris Weidman, Uriah Hall rematch. Again, a fight that happened 10.5 years ago in Atlantic City. Very rare to see something like this play out. But I remember when they first fought, it was a very big deal here on the Northeast because they were two really big-time prospects. Everyone thought that Hall was eventually going to go to the UFC. Weidman had a bunch of buzz surrounding him, 2-0 at the time, moving down to 185. I love this matchmaking. I thought it was the fight to make after Hall beat Anderson Silva. Earlier this week, Brett, Weidman told me that he truly believes in his heart, and I know fighters say this all the time, I win this fight I win one
All right, and
more.
our final fighter to weigh in this morning.
Stand by.
Charged with kicking off the pay-per-view main card in the light heavyweight division, former world title challenger Anthony Lionheart Smith.
Get back to that Weidman Hall 2 discussion, but let's give Anthony Smith his due. One of the good guys in this game, has done a phenomenal job with the pre and post fight shows here on ESPN Plus. Coming off a nice win over Devin Clark.
206 pounds, the official weight for Anthony Smith.
Am I crazy, or does Anthony Smith have a new chest tattoo? Am I wrong about that?
All right, all the
like
fighters
that's new.
have successfully weighed in. We look forward to seeing you guys later today for the ceremonial weigh-in at the ViStar Veterans Memorial Arena, 4 p.m.
It's
local.
not easy to keep track of all of the Anthony Smith tattoos. So if you saw a new one in there, I'll take your word for it, Ariel. I couldn't
Gonna have
tell
to
you.
dig into the archives for that one. Back to Weidman Hall. So Weidman said, look, I win this fight, and I feel like I could beat this guy. I already beat him 10.5 years ago. Of course, Hall has become a much different fighter since teaming up with Fortis MMA and their great head coach, Saif Saud. Then give me one more. I have the skill set to beat Izzy. I saw the blueprint with Jan Blachowicz. I saw it. I saw what he did to him with his wrestling. I could beat this guy. A lot of fans, of course, scoff at that. In your opinion, does Chris Weidman have another title run in him? Based on what you saw against Omari Akhmedov, does he have? Could he be a player again at 185, or do you think there's a ceiling at this point for him?
I mean, hey, I won't completely dismiss it and say he has no chance. We know how good Chris Weidman can be. We know how well-rounded he is. We know the mentality that he's made up of. So I wouldn't say that it's impossible. No, I mean, after seeing Glover Teixeira and Jan Blachowicz, I mean, we got that light heavyweight champion on the books. So you can't count out any of these guys who have had success and are saying they can do it again. This is a big show me fight for Chris Weidman, though. You know, yes, he's coming off of a good win against Akhmedov, and that's not an easy win by any stretch of imagination. But you know, I don't think he looked like a world beater that night. You know, no one's coming off of that fight, and like you said, he's talking about Israel Adesanya. People are like, yeah, you know, I mean, that last performance is not getting me excited to see Chris fight Israel Adesanya. I like what he told you, Ariel, but I also think that, you know, in addition to that, he told you about maybe 4 fights left. He wants to win the belt and then defend it and then walk away. All that's great, but when you start to talk about the end of your career in that way, in a very, very real way, you know, sometimes you hear guys say like, oh, I want to fight for a few more years. I want to retire when I'm 35. But it's like they're saying it, but it's not really in their mind, thinking about the end of their career. To me, it was more genuine coming from Chris to you that hey, like, I am thinking about the end of my career. And that's always dangerous, man. I mean, we've seen that. One thing that Dana White says that is true is that you start to have one foot out the door just a little bit. It's good to think about life after fighting, but you got to be in there and you got to be hungry and you got to really, really, want it when you're fighting. Because I'm telling you right now, Uriah Hall wants it right now. I mean, they're both the same age, but it feels like Uriah Hall is in a different place in his career where he's hungrier than potentially Chris Weidman is. Maybe I'm wrong, and Chris has a great opportunity to show us that. That's what I'm saying when it's a show me fight for Chris, because he got the pressure off of himself because he got a win in his last fight. He's still a name. He still is going to have opportunities to get these big fights, but this is a big one. This is going to really dictate a lot of what happens, next in his career.
I agree with that. I would also argue that it's a show me fight for Hall, an opportunity to right the wrong of 10.5 years ago, to show that he can be a player at 185, a true contender, to fight a name like Chris Weidman. Like I said, there's some bad blood there. Weidman coming off a tragic accident involving his father-in-law, who passed away not that long ago, and he's fighting with a heavy heart. So I think he has a lot on his mind, a lot on his heart going into this fight. So I love this fight. I love this whole main card. Smith Croot is great. The 3 title fights, great. You know, the more I think about it, Michael, Jorge Masvidal wins on Saturday, 18 years in the game, very reminiscent. Dare I say 1992 Masters, Freddie Couples winning his only major championship. I mean, come on, you don't see the connection there? Jorge Masvidal is Freddie Couples. I'm sure you didn't expect that connection on this show.
Couples, the way they love Jorge Masvidal in mixed martial arts, so I will give you that one, Ariel. That is a good analogy from golf to MMA. Let's give the ladies a little bit of shine here right now because they deserve it, because you can make the argument they are running this card at UFC 261 with 2 title fights, including the co-main event. Let's go back a little more than 13 months ago. Zhang Wai Lee against Ariani Carnelosi stood toe-to-toe for the strawweight title. Zhang was looking to defend her title for the first time, while Joanna was attempting to become a 2-time strawweight champion. And what ensued when that door closed on the octagon was an instant mixed martial arts classic.
asked you on Saturday. I promised you hasn't face someone like me. Shut up. Please, I will shut your mouth with my fist. Take care.
In the UFC, regardless of gender, everything's so tight, everything crisp, no wasted Zhang Wai Lee with slightly more volume, an appreciative Vegas crowd as you'd expect. She's such a arguably the greatest fight in women's mixed martial arts history. What a fight! And still the undisputed.
Yo, I still get chills watching that because that was such a classic mixed martial arts battle. I'm not sure we've ever seen 2 fighters, male or female, take that much punishment over the course of 5 championship rounds. But here's the deal. It not only showcased the best of MMA, but all of a sudden, Zhang, she went to superstardom in her native country of China with that win, eclipsing 1 billion hashtag reads on Twitter and video views on UFC China TikTok. For a comparison, all 6 NBA Finals games between the Heat and the Lakers totaled 1.4 billion. In other words, Zhang is real in her native country of China. Now she has the chance to run it back and defend her title again against someone who knows something else about being a champion. Brett, let me start with you on this particular bout. What stands out to you in terms of the matchup itself? Because if we say styles make fights, what about these 2 opposing styles?
I mean, I love this matchup because a lot of it has to do with what Rose does. You know, when Rose is on and she is, you know, when you watch Rose at her best, you see what she loves to do. She's very, very fluid. She uses feints incredibly well. She uses distance incredibly well. It's just really fun to watch, Michael. It's very, very entertaining to watch. And she confuses people out there. But the kryptonite to that is just crowding her. You know, you stop worrying about being confused when you just put your head down and you bully her and you give her that physical look. And that's what Jessica Andrade did. You know, when she took the title away from Rose, she did it again in the rematch, even though Rose won that fight. You know, that physical presence disrupts a lot of what Rose likes to do. And that is what Wai Lee does. I mean, we know that she's physical, she's strong. It seems like she lives in the gym. She just has that championship mentality. And then last year, we got to see on top of all of that, how tough she is, man. When she needs to just move forward and bite down on her mouthpiece, she did so against one of the best strikers that we've ever seen in female MMA, and MMA period, and that's Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So I think we learned a lot about the champion, Wai Lee, in her last fight. We learned that she has that toughness, she has that grit, and that's going to make her very, very tough to topple. But what we also know about Rose is that when she is on, she is very, very frustrating. She's very, very confusing. She can give those brilliant performances like she did twice against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So I think that we saw a great fight, obviously, a fight of the year last year between Joanna and Wai Lee, but I think this one's totally different because of what Rose brings to the table and how Wai Lee is actually going to deal with it. A lot of times we're saying, how is the challenger going to deal with what the champion brings? I'm very, very curious to see what the champion brings to face someone like Rose, who is just so dynamic if you let her get going.
And I want to talk more about Rose in a second, but Ariel, as I bring it back to you to keep the focus on Zhang here just for a second. Since she's been in the UFC, by the way, she's won 21 straight fights professionally. Her first 5 in UFC, she's won. Now she's defending her title yet again, and she's won by decision. She's gone the distance. She has that cardio. She's won by submission. She's won by knockout. Like, she has the tool set. And from a striking standpoint, her hands seem so heavy when she's in the octagon from what we've seen over the last 5 years. What do you make of her rise rise within UFC. And as we mentioned, with the backdrop of the entire country of China rooting for her.
Yeah, no, it's an unbelievable story. One of the best stories in the history of this sport, because for the longest time, the UFC was searching far and wide for a great Chinese-born fighter, and they couldn't find one. They even did in a season of The Ultimate Fighter. It didn't really produce anyone of note. And then here comes Zhang Wai Lee, who gets an opportunity very early in her UFC career to fight for the belt. And I'll be honest, when they announced that fight against Jessica Andrade in China, her fighting for the belt, I was like, all right, I get it. It's great for the market. It's great for the sport, but she doesn't really deserve it. And then she goes out there and starches Andrade in less than a minute, and you're seeing the highlights right here. It was an unbelievable performance, and then everyone, including myself, just shut up. There is nothing that you can say about this woman, and she has gotten better since then. You mentioned the 21 wins. Very impressive. 17 of those, by the way, finishes. So this is someone who goes for the kill. I mean, just look at the ferocity here. She, like I said earlier, I compared it to a Mexican-style boxer in the sense that she is, all action, sits in the pocket, likes to go toe-to-toe. I mean, if you've never seen the Ioana and Jacek fight from last March, you're truly missing out on one of the greatest fights of all time, period. I'm not talking about greatest women's fights of all time. I'm talking about greatest fights of all time. It was unbelievable. But now you have someone, Ioana's style is a lot like Zhang in the sense that she likes to sit down and go toe-to-toe and just slug it out. Rose isn't that fighter. Rose is the kind of fighter who, like I said, likes to hum around the cage and likes to use her jab and her length and her foot movement and her speed. And that's why I love this styles matchup. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there are very few takedowns in this fight, but it's just the two different ways of striking, going toe-to-toe, meeting in the middle of the octagon, and who wins out? The one who likes to circle around and, fight at bay, or the one who likes to go, like in there like a Tasmanian devil and just take off their opponent's head. I can't wait to see how it all plays out.
Rose has been one of my favorite fighters for a long time. Don't get me wrong. I love the trash talking. I love the drama that, fighters can have going back and forth that sort of, sets the anticipation for a fight, but also like people who are genuine. And Rose Namajunas is one of the most genuine people in professional sports. And she doesn't talk a lot, but she's in there. She's no nonsense. That's who she is. And that's what she brings to this fight. But again, it's been 2 years since she was back in the octagon. Of course, she lost that belt, and the whole deal of being a champion, Ariel, and then not being a champion again, all of that is adding to the intrigue from my standpoint of Rose going back into this octagon, period, but also going up against someone like Zhang.
Well, I agree with what you said about Rose at the very top there, because she is as real as it gets, to steal an old UFC slogan. And sometimes it's to her detriment because, in this sport where there's a lot of bravado and a lot of machismo, we don't like to show emotion. We don't like to cry and things like that. She doesn't mind doing that. She wears her heart on her sleeve. She's also an introvert. She's also, and it's kind of funny that she's a part of a card where the fans are being welcomed back, capacity crowd. She is someone who I would bet would prefer to fight in an empty arena because she doesn't like having the spotlight on her. So she wins the belt at a young age, and she tried her hardest to not make the title into a big thing, to almost shun the title, to shun the spotlight, to shun the accolades, to shun everything that comes with being a champion. And interestingly enough, in doing so, she actually made the belt into a bigger deal in her mind. And that's why when she lost the title to Jessica Andrade, she was actually relieved. She wanted nothing to do with it. In fact, she thought about walking away. She just didn't like being champion. She's come a long way since then. Almost 2 years later, she has grown up a lot. She has evolved as a person. She has matured. And now she wants to win the belt, and she wants to have a different experience with the title. She wants to use the title as a platform to talk about things that interest her, to be the kind of champion that she would want to look up to be a role model. She had a tough go with COVID last year. 2 of her family members passed away. She was able to go in there in July and win that fight against Andrade, but broke her nose, had to take some time off. Now here she is, a much more mature person, a much more comfortable person in her own skin, and one that wants to have a completely different experience and connection with that title than the first time around. I appreciate her saying that. I don't think a lot of people would say something like that and be that honest, and I'm curious to see if she wins. If after her title reign is over, the second one, and by the way, she'd be the first fighter to hold the title in the same weight class on 2 separate occasions, I'm curious if her experience will be a lot different with that belt.
Yeah, and that is a good question, Brett, as I turn attention to you as well here, because so much has happened to Rose Namajunas since she lost that belt, and in the layoff, whether it's physical, emotional, all the things that she's gone through, and now she has a chance once again to reach the pinnacle of her sport. How much do you think that's weighing on her in that regard as she goes into this matchup?
I like where Rose is at, actually. I know that this question always comes up with Rose. It probably will continue to, and it's because for all the reasons Ariel just mentioned, she brings it on herself in terms of how open she is, with her emotions and in her interviews and everything else. I think sometimes we forget how young she is. She's only 28 years old. It feels like she should be in her 30s when you think about how, she came off the Ultimate Fighter and was involved in that inaugural title fight against Carla Esparza, and then she's talked about wanting to step away and then being a champion and then having a remarkable performance against Ioana Jędrzejczyk. And when that happened and she became a champion, I remember she and Pat Barry flew home to Denver. And I spoke to them one time. I was actually at their house, and they were telling me that when they got back from that win, when she was at the center of the world, she had just knocked out Ioana Jędrzejczyk in Madison Square Garden in devastating fashion, in upsetting fashion. They were basically hiding in their house. They closed their blinds. They were looking outside. They just wanted to shut off the world a little bit because I just think it was overwhelming for them. Rose, again, is an introvert. She likes to sit in her house. She likes to play the piano. She loves to play with her dog in her backyard. She didn't want necessarily all of that attention. And I think when you're dealing that, especially in your early 20s, essentially, it can be very overwhelming. And I think we saw an individual dealing with that over the last few years. But when I think about where Rose is now, coming in with all of that experience, I mean, she's been in title fights now. She's basically grown up in title fights. She's grown up on UFC pay-per-view main cards. I mean, this is now someone that, in my mind, in terms of just when you look at her career as far as growth and maturity, she is at a point now where I think that that it would make sense if she just came into her own and she became the dominant champion of this division. I think a lot of us are looking at Wei Li Zhang as she could be the dominant champion of this division. After what she just did to Ioana, after the manner in which she took the belt from Jessica Andrade. Rose Namajunas is 28 years old. She's coming into her prime, and we've seen in her moments of brilliancy, there's not many people out there that can deal with her. So I am looking at Rose in the same way I'm looking at Wei Li, that she could be the long-term future of this division. And that's again, everything that goes into this fight stylistically, but also all the things that I just mentioned. This fight is money, Michael. I cannot wait for this co-main event.
Yeah, oftentimes in sports we say the hardest part of being a champion is not getting there, it's staying there. And it's not oftentimes just because the opponent, it's about how you deal with being a champion. And clearly Rose dealt with it in a way that wasn't comfortable for her. And maybe the second time around she'll be much better in that position as a champion. But now let's turn our attention, guys, to the women's flyweight championship. Valentina Shevchenko defends her title against Jessica Andrade. We've been talking about so much over the last several minutes. Andrade fights for just the second time at 125, looking to join Amanda Nunes as the only women's fighters to win titles in 2 divisions. Andrade has 12 wins in the UFC. That's second most behind, guess who else? Nunes among women's fighters. So, Ariel, let's look at this matchup. I mean, Valentina's been so dominant since she moved down to this weight class several fights ago. Andrade here just the second time at this weight. What do you make of this matchup?
Okay, I love this matchup. I think this will be her most competitive, Valentina's most competitive title fight at 125 up until this point, and perhaps for the foreseeable future, because I just don't see any other real threats for her right now at 125. Of course, crazy things can happen in the sport. You can slip on a banana peel. But right now, in terms of who's out there, I don't see anyone who can give her the kind of test that Jessica Andrade can give her. Now, you look at the odds. This, as far as odds are concerned, closest for a Valentina Shevchenko title fight since her first title fight at 125 against Ioana Jędrzejczyk almost 3 years ago in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So I think that speaks to it. I mean, just look at this right here, minus 350 for Ioana back then. And as of right this moment, I do believe she is a minus 450, opened as a minus 400. So that speaks to it. I mean, look at some of those other odds there. Minus 1,800 against Jennifer Maia. Oh, by the way, Jennifer Maia won a round against Valentina, and all of us collectively lost our minds early in that fight. Like, oh my God, is Jennifer Maia going to do this? Eventually, Valentina Shevchenko coasted and won a pretty decisive decision. But I do think that Jessica Andrade will take some confidence away from this fight, Maia Shevchenko, back in November, because Andrade is a much better fighter, in my opinion, than Jennifer Maia. She's a stronger fighter. She's a better striker. She's a better grappler, all those things and more. And so I think if she can keep the fight close, I think if she can make it dirty, especially early on, and avoid getting into a striking match with Valentina Shevchenko, she might have a chance. Ultimately, I'm picking Valentina Shevchenko, but this will be her toughest test. Andrade looked amazing at 125. I thought she was a little too small for 135, a little too big for 115. This is the sweet spot for her. 125, a former champion, by the way, someone who beat Rose Namajunas, who's been in big fights, who knows what it takes to win a title. Going in there against Valentina, love this fight. And it's nice to finally be involved in a Valentina Shevchenko fight. I say involved, I'm not actually involved, covering a Valentina Shevchenko fight where it kind of feels like there's a chance something crazy might happen because, for the longest time, the fights feel like they've been over before they even started.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Ariel, because Shevchenko's been so dominant. You're like, all right, she's going to win this one again, but how will she win it? How fast will it end? Things of that nature. But, Brett, now we have someone that she's facing who's been in these fights before, who has the talent, as Ariel mentioned, to win a championship. What do you make of the experience that Andraj has in other big fights coming into this bout against Shevchenko?
Well, here's the thing about this matchup, Michael, is that I agree with everything Ariel said in terms of this is Valentina's toughest test, although I will say it may not look that way when we see this fight, because to me, the matchup clearly benefits Valentina. Jessica is a bull in a china shop. That is her style. I had one person describe it to me. It was Angela Hill, actually. She said that Jessica Andrade, she just doesn't really play by the rules. A lot of things that she does is technically not really correct, but it works for her because she's got that game-changing power, that intimidating power, and when she decides to move forward, she moves forward aggressively. We were just talking about Rose Namajunas. We saw that it worked on occasions, big time with Rose Namajunas. But Valentina Shevchenko is just a different animal. She's not going to be intimidated by Jessica's size at 125. She's going to match up well physically with her. She's a great counter striker. I mean, out of all the things that Valentina does well, which is basically everything, right, Michael? She does everything correct in this sport. I would say her best attribute is her counter striking. So when Jessica moves forward, she's going to be walking into a lot of high level offense from Valentina. Now, having said all of that, I still, as a viewer of this fight on Saturday, will be on the edge of my seat because Jessica has that one-punch knockout power, and you can't say that about a lot of the 125ers that Valentina has faced. So this could actually look like a runaway fight for Valentina when we see it on Saturday, but the point still stands that since Valentina has held the belt, this is her most dangerous task.
All right, Brett, I'm about to pose a question that could be controversial. Ariel, I want to get your take on it as well. Here we go. Oftentimes in sports, we talk about who are the most dominant athletes, right? And for me, dominant doesn't necessarily mean best. Dominant means the gap between you and whoever's the next best at your particular position, sport, what have you. Amanda Nunes is clearly the greatest women's fighter we've ever seen in mixed martial arts. I don't think you get an argument on that. But let me ask you this, Brett. Who is more dominant in their respective divisions? Amanda Nunes over her opposition or Valentina Shevchenko over hers?
I would probably say Valentina, actually. I think I go in. We go into both of these females' fights every time thinking, it's going to take something short of a miracle for them to lose their belt. But for Valentina's, I go in, I guess, just a little bit more confident, and I think that also speaks to the flyweight division has not been around as long as the bantamweight division. So the depth is maybe not quite as much. You got Jermaine Durandamy up at 135. You got Holly Holm at 135. On any given night, those could be competitive fights between Amanda and Valentina. But we are definitely splitting hairs, Michael. But what I will say is that if Valentina were to move back up to bantamweight, that all of a sudden is a very difficult fight for Amanda. I actually thought that Valentina won the second fight between those two, and we're all kind of thinking that there might be a trilogy down the road. So I would say Valentina, but it's a very, very close question. But I also think that if Valentina moved up, well, then she answers the question for all of us, because if Valentina moves up, then she has the best chance of dethroning Amanda.
There's a big difference right now, in my opinion, between Amanda and Valentina, and it has nothing to do with their actual skill set. It has to do with their strength of schedule, if you will. There is no denying when you look at Amanda Nunes' record. One of the reasons why I think a lot of people consider her the female GOAT in MMA is because of who she has defeated and how. Miesha Tate, Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm, Chris Cyborg. Unfortunately for Valentina Shevchenko, she just hasn't had those foils just yet. And when she fought Amanda Nunes twice, they were supremely close fights. And I agree with Brett. You can make a very strong case in Edmonton that she did beat Amanda Nunes. And a lot of people think the first time they fought, if it was a 5-round fight, she was en route to beating Amanda Nunes. The problem is it's hard to say that she is better or, is more dominant because she's beating people who aren't as good as the ones that Amanda Nunes is beating. But I'll say this, by the time it's all said and done for both women, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Amanda ends up the greatest of all time. I wouldn't be surprised if they fight a third time and Valentina wins. I think Valentina will be in that discussion. And I think if she would have fought those same people, she probably wins as well. That's how good Valentina is. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of an Anderson Silva situation, a Jose Aldo situation. You're only as good or as revered as the people who you are beating. And unfortunately, she is fighting in a weight class that just isn't as evolved as 135 and to a certain degree 145 because she's fighting the likes of Chris Cyborg up there. And that's why maybe she won't be discussed in that conversation. But make no mistake about it, they are neck and neck. It is 1A, 1B, in my opinion, between these two. It's not, as some people like to say, like 1A and then there's like a 4C. That's not what this is. They are very close.
That's why this matchup against Andraj will give us even more value on what we've seen from Shevchenko if Valentina can win this fight in terms of the competition she's faced over her last several fights. Again, since moving down, she's gone 6-0, 3 finishes, and she's just outstriking opponents 157 significant strikes. That's how dominating she has been. So again, we've got a stacked card coming up Saturday at UFC 261. And with that in mind, we want to invite you at home to make your fight picks and challenge your friends for a chance to win $5,000 with ESPN's UFC 261 Pick'em game. To play for free, just go to ESPN.com/UFC Pick'em and make your picks right now. Fans at home, you can pick your winners for every matchup on the card, but for right now, we've got our resident experts, Ariel and Brett, so we're going to have them make their picks on the other available games, part of UFC's Pick'em on ESPN. Ariel, I'm going to start with you. Over under 2.5 main card fights go the distance.
Ooh, that's a tough. Okay, so I'll say I think the main event goes the distance.
Okay, that's one.
I'll go over because I think the main event goes the distance. I think one of the other title fights goes the distance, probably Zhang and Rose, and then I'll say Weidman Hall probably goes the distance. So I'll say over.
Okay, Brett, what about you?
Yeah, I'll take the over too. I could see all 3 title fights going the distance, and I could see the Hall and Weidman fight going the distance as well. So, not a slam dunk, but I think there's a decent chance that all 3 of these could see the scorecards.
If Mozvidal wins, can he win going the distance? Brett.
No.
Right, he has to get a finish, right? Ariel, you would agree probably?
I disagree.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I think look, there was once a time where he was like decision Mozvidal, right? He was like split decision Mozvidal, close fights. This man is look, Usman's a tough out, Mosvidal's a tough out. I wouldn't be surprised either man wins. It has to be via decision. I mean, you're not going to knock out Kamaru Usman at this point. I know Gilbert Burns rocked him a little bit, but yeah, I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I wouldn't be shocked if he wins via decision. If you told me right now you saw the fight and Mosvidal won, and you tell me, oh, by the way, it was decision, I'm not shocked.
All right, fair enough. All right, now back to the Pick'em game. Of the 3 championship fights, how many titles will change hands tomorrow night? Brett, start with you.
I'm gonna say one. One of the 3.
Okay. Are you going to say who you think that is? You're going to save that for UFC Live on ABC?
Sure. You know what? I'll say Rose. I know that I'm hearing from I do a betting show as well, the Best Bets UFC over on YouTube, and my two colleagues, James Krause and Nick Kalikas, who I respect their opinion very much, they love Wai Lee at -200. So I think I feel like I'm stepping out on a limb here, but at +175, not only do I like the value on Rose, but something just tells me in my gut, Michael, I've doubted Rose before, and I don't want to do it again. I'm going to take Rose.
All right, fair enough. Ariel, what about you? Championship belts changing hands.
Yeah, I'll also say one. But honestly, in my heart right now, I just feel, we only saw it happen once where all 3 titles changed hands. That was a few years ago at Madison Square Garden. That was maybe the craziest 90 minutes in the history of the sport. I don't think it's going to be quite like that. I also don't think it's going to be 0 for 3 as far as titles changing hands. I'll go with one, but in my heart, I can't really decide which it's going to be. So I'm gonna abstain from giving you any further details.
Fair enough. At least you gave us an answer if you didn't give us the full summary of your answer. Ariel, Brett, guys, thanks so much. Much more from you two guys over the next couple of days, because we do have wall-to-wall coverage over the next 2 days. Beginning this evening, UFC Live, 5:30 Eastern on ESPN2. And then Saturday, join us for a special edition of UFC Live on ABC. That's 4 Eastern, 1 o'clock out west. And then all you got to do is jump over to ESPN social channels to catch Ariel and Chael breaking it all down. And it all culminates, of course, ESPN Plus pay-per-view, 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. 3 title fights on the card for just the 8th time in UFC history. And 2 of them will feature women's fights, including Jessica Andraj, Valentina Shevchenko, the Bullet, just dominating her division. Rose Namajunas, can she be a champion in her division for a second time? Zhang Wai Lee, what a superstardom run she is on since she came to the UFC. Jorge Masvidal, can he get revenge against the current undefeated champion, Kamaru Usman?